He wasn't supposed to notice her. She was just another waitress in a dimly lit Italian restaurant, blending into the background of soft jazz and clinking glasses. But Vincent Torino had survived long enough to know one rule when something feels invisible. It's usually deadly. She was shaking. Not the kind of nervousness that comes from spilling wine on an expensive suit, but the kind that comes from standing one step away from a grave. When she placed the knife beside his plate, her fingers brushed his skin. And in that instant, Vincent understood something was wrong. He didn't look at the note she slipped beneath the silverware. He waited. He always waited. Because the last time someone warned him in secret, half his empire burned overnight. What Vincent didn't know yet was this: the woman walking away from his table wasn't there to arrest him. She wasn't there to seduce him. She wasn't even there to betray him. She was there to save his life and destroy everything else he believed in. The first thing Vincent Torino noticed was not her face. It was the silence that followed her footsteps. Bellanote was never truly quiet. Power hummed here, low and constant, hidden beneath the clink of crystal glasses and the velvet murmur of deals that would never be written down. The restaurant breathed money, influence, and danger in equal measure. Men like Vincent did not come here to eat. They came to be seen, to remind the city that some empires did not need to hide. Vincent sat at his usual table by the window, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. To the untrained eye, he looked like a successful businessman enjoying a private dinner. To those who knew better, he was a man whose name could end bloodlines with a single phone call. At 58, he had learned how to survive by trusting very little and observing everything. That was why he noticed her. The waitress approached with measured steps, carrying a tray that trembled ever so slightly. Not enough for anyone else to care. Enough for Vincent to recognize fear when it wore a polite smile. Her uniform was spotless, her movements rehearsed, but her breathing betrayed her. Too shallow. Too fast. Fear like that did not come from spilling wine on the wrong suit. It came from knowing something irreversible was about to happen. She stopped at his table and greeted him softly. Her voice was steady, but only because she forced it to be. Vincent's gaze lifted slowly, deliberately, giving her no sign that she had already failed the first test. He studied her the way a hunter studies unfamiliar terrain, late 20s. Dark hair pulled back too tightly, eyes that had seen too much to belong in a place like this. "Your order, sir," she said. Sarah Martinez placed the cutlery beside his plate. In that brief, controlled motion, her fingers brushed his hand. It lasted less than a second. Just long enough. A folded piece of paper slid beneath the knife. Vincent did not look down. He continued cutting into his steak with unhurried precision, the blade gliding through the meat as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But inside his mind, years of survival instincts snapped awake, sharp and merciless. He did not react because reaction was weakness. Reaction was how men died. Across the room, security cameras swept their slow arcs. Conversations flowed, laughter rose and fell. No one noticed the transfer of something that did not belong in Bellanote. Sarah straightened, her face carefully blank, and stepped away. Vincent waited. He finished his meal. He sipped his wine. He nodded once at the manager. A man who owed his prosperity to Vincent's favor? Only when he entered the restroom. Only when the heavy door closed behind him and the lock slid into place. Did he finally retrieve the note? The paper was thin, cheap, folded twice. Inside a single sentence stared back at him. North Warehouse. 18 hours. Don't trust anyone. No signature, no explanation. Vincent stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into a joke. They did not. The handwriting was uneven, the pressure inconsistent. Whoever had written it had been afraid. Not the theatrical fear of an informant bargaining for money, but something deeper. Desperate. He raised his eyes to the mirror. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent Torino did not know who was hunting him. The warehouse mentioned was real, one of many, but not insignificant. A place only a handful of people knew about. A place that was supposed to be invisible. If this was a trap, it was exquisitely designed. If it was a warning, it was impossible. Either option was dangerous. Vincent folded the note and slipped it into his jacket. He washed his hands slowly, watching his reflection as water streamed over skin that had signed more death warrants than he cared to remember. His face bore the marks of time and power, lines etched by decisions that could not be undone. Yet behind his eyes, something unfamiliar stirred. Uncertainty. He exited the restroom and scanned the dining room again. Sarah was nowhere in sight. That absence unsettled him more than her presence had. Outside, the city breathed in neon and rain-slicked pavement. Vincent's car pulled up the moment he stepped onto the curb. His driver said nothing. As always, loyalty, Vincent knew, was built on silence as much as fear. As the car moved through the city, Vincent's thoughts returned to the girl, a waitress who moved like someone trained to disappear, a warning delivered without demand, without expectation of reward. People did not do that. Back at his residence, Vincent summoned his most trusted men, quietly, without panic. Orders were given in fragments, each one meaningless on its own. Background checks, employee records, recent shipments. No one was told why. That night, Vincent did not sleep. Across the city, Sarah sat alone in a small apartment that did not feel like home. Her phone lay face down on the table, silent but heavy with threat. She replayed the moment over and over, the brush of her fingers against Vincent's hand, the weight of the choice she had made. She had crossed a line that could not be erased. She was FBI. Or she had been. Once. Now she existed in the space between duty and conscience, where survival depended on secrets and timing. She knew Vincent Torino was a criminal. She also knew he was not the man the Bureau wanted him to be. The operation scheduled for the next day was not about justice. It was about leverage, about burying old mistakes under fresh blood. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing that by morning, one of two things would happen. Vincent would listen. Or everyone would burn. Back at his desk, Vincent opened a secure file containing the waitress's employment information. The name confirmed what he already suspected. Sarah Martinez. The file was too clean. No debt, no scandals, no obvious reason to be here. People without shadows were always the most dangerous. Vincent leaned back, the note resting between his fingers like a fuse already lit. Somewhere in the city, a woman had decided his life was worth saving. He did not yet know why. What he did know was this: the moment that paper touched his hand, the balance of his world had shifted, and nothing that followed would be clean. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Morning arrived without mercy. Vincent Torino stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, watching the city wake as if nothing fragile had been disturbed overnight. Traffic flowed, offices filled. Ordinary lives continued, blissfully unaware of how close they lived to the machinery of violence. He had spent decades ensuring that machinery ran smoothly. What unsettled him now was not the threat itself, but the irregularity of it. The note had been verified. Every detail in it was accurate. The warehouse, the timing, even the shipment schedule, known only to men Vincent had personally vetted. That meant one of two things: either someone inside his organization had broken, or someone outside had reached deeper than they should have been able to. Both possibilities were unacceptable. He did not rage. Rage wasted energy. Vincent preferred precision. By noon, the waitress had a name, an address, and a history that refused to misbehave. Sarah Martinez had been employed at Bellinot for less than 3 months. No criminal record, no financial distress, no visible ambition. Her file read like a carefully curated lie, not because of what it contained, but because of what it lacked. People without motives did not exist. They were simply hiding them better. Across the city, Sarah moved through her day with practiced normalcy. She showed up for her shift on time. She smiled when spoken to. She poured wine with steady hands that betrayed nothing of the storm beneath her ribs. Inside her ear, the thin whisper of the Bureau reminded her she was being watched, though never directly. They did not need to threaten her. They owned too much of her life already. What they did not own was her conscience. The operation briefing from the night before replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. Tactical language, clean diagrams, a necessary collapse that would justify years of buried corruption. She had recognized the pattern instantly. Someone powerful needed a distraction, and Vincent Torino was convenient. Sarah did not believe in saints, but she believed in lines, and the one they were about to cross would drown more than criminals. That was why she had written the note. Not because she trusted Vincent, but because she trusted the man he had been forced to become. Survivors recognized each other. They learned the same silence. At Bellinot, Sarah sensed the shift before she saw it. Men she did not recognize lingered too long near the entrance. Their eyes followed her without interest, which was far more alarming than curiosity. She did not look at them. She did not need to. Fear sharpened her awareness into something cold and exact. In the afternoon, Vincent arrived. Not at his usual hour, not at his usual table. He took a seat at the bar, where no one expected him to stay long, where the angles were wrong and the lighting unforgiving. Sarah noticed immediately. The city might have continued its rhythm, but her pulse changed. She did not approach him. She waited until he raised his hand. "Water," he said, his voice unremarkable. As she placed the glass in front of him, Vincent did not look up. He spoke quietly, just loud enough to reach her and no one else. "You have 30 seconds, he said. "Choose your words carefully." Sarah's fingers tightened around the tray. She had imagined this moment a dozen times. None of those versions had accounted for how calm he sounded, how controlled. Danger, she realized, did not announce itself. It invited you to make mistakes. "You shouldn't be here," she said. A pause. Not of surprise, of interest. "That's not what people usually say to me." She met his gaze then, fully, without apology. "They're watching both of us." Vincent studied her face, searching for cracks. He found exhaustion instead, and resolve. "Who?" he asked. Sarah shook her head slightly. "Not here." That was enough. Vincent nodded once, stood, and left without another word. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute. It felt like an eternity. That night, Sarah received a message from an unknown number. Docklands, 2 a.m. Come alone. She deleted it immediately, then memorized it. Trust was not the currency being traded here. Risk was. The Docklands smelled of salt and rust and abandonment. Sarah arrived early, scanning the shadows with professional restraint. When Vincent emerged from the darkness, she felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. He had come alone. That alone told her more than words could. "You're FBI," he said, not as an accusation, but a conclusion. She did not deny it. "You warned me," he continued. "That makes no sense." Sarah inhaled slowly. "Because the operation isn't about you. It's about erasing something they don't want found." "And you," Vincent asked. "Where do you fit? I'm collateral," she said softly. "So are you." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Vincent considered her with a gaze that had weighed men's lives and found them lacking. This woman was not pleading. She was offering information at personal cost. That made her dangerous in a way he respected. "You realize," he said, "that whatever happens next will destroy your career." "I know," Sarah replied. "I also know that if I stay silent, it will destroy who I am." For the first time since reading the note, Vincent felt something shift into focus. This was not a trap. It was a fracture. He turned away, staring out at the dark water. "You don't save men like me," he said. "You survive us." Sarah stepped closer, close enough to feel the gravity of him, the weight of a life built on irreversible choices. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe some men don't deserve to be used as sacrifices." Vincent looked at her then, really looked at her. The city behind them kept breathing, unaware that 2 lives had just crossed in a way that could not be undone. Whatever game was being played, it was no longer simple. And for the first time in a very long while, Vincent Torino was not certain he wanted it to be. The clock had started, and neither of them could step away now. The city did not sleep that night. It only pretended to. Vincent Torino returned to his residence before dawn, the Docklands still clinging to his clothes like a memory that refused to fade. He did not summon his men immediately. Instead, he sat alone in his study, the walls lined with quiet proof of a life built on control. Every decision he had ever survived was based on one principle: never let emotion into the room. Emotion blurred edges. Emotion made men predictable. Yet the woman at the docks had unsettled him in a way violence never could. Sarah Martinez had not begged. She had not threatened. She had offered truth without demanding safety in return. That kind of honesty was rare, dangerous, and often fatal. Vincent activated a secure line and issued a single order: not to investigate the FBI, not yet. He wanted his own house examined first. Every shipment, every access code, every man who knew the northern warehouse existed. He suspected betrayal, but suspicion was not enough. He needed proof sharp enough to draw blood. Across the city, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, phone face down beside her. The meeting replayed in fragments. Vincent's stillness, his eyes, dark and unreadable, yet not cruel. She had expected anger, contempt. She had not expected restraint. That restraint frightened her more than fury would have. By morning, the bureau noticed the shift. Meetings became shorter, smiles tighter. Her supervisor watched her with a patience that felt rehearsed. Sarah understood the warning without words. They were closing the circle. If she misstepped now, she would not get another chance. She considered disappearing. She had the skills, the contacts, but running would confirm their suspicions and leave Vincent exposed. She had started this. Walking away would not absolve her. At noon, she received another message. No location this time, just 4 words. They're not your enemy. Sarah stared at the screen. Vincent? She could feel it. The phrasing was too deliberate to belong to anyone else. She typed a response and deleted it twice before sending. Then who is? The reply came almost instantly. Someone who knows you both. The implication tightened around her chest. Vincent spent the day watching men reveal themselves without knowing it. Loyalty showed in the smallest things. A glance held too long. A question asked too carefully. By evening, patterns emerged. One name surfaced repeatedly, quietly, like a stain bleeding through clean fabric. Marco. His nephew. His blood. Marco had been raised inside the structure of Vincent's empire, taught discipline before mercy, strategy before sentiment. Vincent had trusted him not because of family, but because he had earned it. Or so Vincent believed. He ordered Marco to meet him at a safe house on the outskirts of the city. No urgency, no explanation. Tests worked best when they felt ordinary. Marco arrived smiling, confident, carrying the ease of a man who believed he stood on solid ground. They spoke of neutral things, business trends, market shifts. Then Vincent mentioned the northern warehouse casually, as if remembering it mid-thought. Marco's smile did not falter, but his pupils contracted. That was all Vincent needed. Meanwhile, Sarah discovered just how deep the trap ran. An internal memo circulated quietly, redacting names, restructuring command. Her name was not listed among the protected. She was being positioned. When the operation went public, someone would need to answer for the leaks. Someone disposable. She left the building early, heart pounding, and ducked into a cafe where mirrors lined the walls. She watched her reflection as if it belonged to someone else. The woman staring back looked composed. She felt anything but. Vincent's message had been vague, but its warning was clear. The enemy was not wearing badges or carrying guns openly. The enemy was inside the system, inside both of theirs. That evening, Vincent sent for Sarah. Not a location, an invitation. The address led her to a penthouse overlooking the river, its luxury understated to the point of arrogance. She hesitated only a moment before entering. If this was a mistake, it was one she had already committed to. Vincent waited near the window, city lights reflecting off the glass like distant stars. He did not turn when she approached. "You trust me," he said. Not asking. "No," Sarah replied honestly. "But I believe you." That earned a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I think," Vincent said, "that we are both being used to clean up a mess neither of us made." He told her about Marco, about the signs, about the quiet confirmation of betrayal. Sarah listened, the pieces aligning with sickening clarity. Internal corruption was the Bureau's oldest disease. She had just never expected it to intersect so cleanly with organized crime. "They'll let the operation happen," she said, publicly, "but they'll adjust the narrative afterward. Blame a compromised agent, a rogue asset, or a waitress," Vincent added. Silence stretched between them, intimate and heavy. Sarah stepped closer. Drawn by gravity, she did not fully understand. "If we expose him," she said carefully, "both sides collapse." "Yes," Vincent replied. Which is why timing matters. For the first time, they spoke not as adversaries or reluctant allies, but as conspirators. The plan was dangerous, elegant. It required trust without safety nets. As the night deepened, the space between them shrank. The tension that had hovered since Bellanote shifted into something sharper, quieter. Their hands brushed as they reviewed details, and neither pulled away. It was not romance born of comfort, but of recognition. Two people standing at the edge of ruin, choosing to look at each other instead of down. Before Sarah left, Vincent caught her wrist gently. Not to restrain, to anchor. "Once this begins," he said, "there will be no neutral ground." Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. There never was. As she disappeared into the elevator, Vincent remained by the window, watching the city that had never forgiven weakness. He knew now where the real danger lay. Not in the FBI, not even in betrayal, but in the fact that for the first time in his life, he was willing to lose everything to uncover the truth. And that willingness would cost more than either of them realized. Night sharpened the city into edges and shadows, and Vincent Torino moved through it with a patience that had outlived most of his enemies. The plan was no longer theoretical. It had weight now, names, timelines, consequences, and at its center stood a truth he had delayed facing for too long. Blood did not lie. It only learned how to hide. Marco arrived at the safe house just after midnight, punctual and confident. dressed like a man who believed the world still belonged to him. Vincent greeted him without ceremony. No guards in sight, no raised voices, only two men sitting across from each other at a narrow table. The air between them tight with things unsaid. They spoke of business first, minor losses, adjustments, a future that sounded ordinary enough to pass as real. Vincent watched Marco's hands, the subtle rhythm of his breath. He mentioned a shipment rerouted at the last minute, a detail altered deliberately. Marco nodded, agreeing too easily. There it was, the smallest fracture. Vincent leaned back, folding his hands. "You've been busy," he said quietly. Marco smiled. "We all have." Vincent did not accuse. He never did. He laid out facts instead, one by one, like pieces on a chessboard. Phone records that didn't exist on paper. Meetings that aligned too cleanly with federal movements. Money that disappeared and reappeared elsewhere, sanitized. Marco's smile faded. "You taught me to be prepared," Marco said after a long pause. "I just learned the lesson better than you expected." Vincent felt the truth settle, heavy and irreversible. Betrayal from an enemy was strategy. Betrayal from family was erosion. It hollowed you out slowly, pretending to be loyalty until there was nothing left to trust. "You sold us," Vincent said. "I saved myself," Marco replied, voice tight but defiant. "They were coming for you anyway." Vincent stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Marco was escorted away, alive for now. Vincent was not merciful. He was patient. There were worse fates than death, and Marco would learn them intimately. Across the city, Sarah felt the walls closing in. Her supervisor called her into a glass-walled office that overlooked the skyline, the city glowing beneath them like something to be owned. The questions were casual, rehearsed. Had she noticed anything unusual at Bellanote? Did Vincent Torino behave differently than expected? Sarah answered with measured calm, offering nothing that could be proven false. When she left, she knew she had been marked. She did not go home. She went instead to the river, where the water swallowed sound and the lights blurred into something almost gentle. Vincent's message arrived as if summoned by her thoughts. "It's him." She did not need to ask who. "Then we're running out of time," she typed back. "We never had much." Came the reply. They met again before dawn, this time in a place stripped of luxury and pretense. A bare apartment above a closed storefront. Walls unadorned, windows blacked out. The room smelled faintly of old wood and rain. Vincent explained what he had confirmed. Sarah listened, her expression tightening with each revelation. Marco was not acting alone. He was a conduit. Information flowed through him to someone higher up, someone protected by rank and history. "They'll let Marco take the fall," Sarah said, publicly. "But the source remains clean, unless we force their hand," Vincent replied. That was the moment the plan changed. They would not stop the operation. They would reshape it. Feed the Bureau just enough truth to expose the rot without destroying the evidence they needed to survive. It was a gamble layered on top of another gamble, the kind that ended careers and lives with equal efficiency. As they worked, tension curled between them, unspoken but undeniable. Their proximity no longer felt accidental. Sarah noticed the scar along Vincent's knuckles, the way his voice softened when he spoke of unintended consequences. Vincent noticed the steadiness beneath her fear, the way she refused to look away from what scared her. "You could still walk away," he said once, not unkindly. Sarah shook her head. "So could you." Their eyes met, and in that instant, the world narrowed, not into romance born of illusion, but into something quieter and more dangerous. Trust, built not on promises, but on shared risk. The twist came with the morning. Sarah's phone buzzed with an internal alert she was never meant to see, a revised operational order. Vincent's name was no longer the primary target. The warehouse was. They were changing the story midstream. They're going to burn it all. Sarah whispered. Evidence, assets, people. Vincent's jaw tightened, including Marco, and anyone inside. The plan they had crafted shattered into fragments. This was no longer about exposure. It was about survival. Vincent made a decision then, one that cut against everything he had built. He would sacrifice part of his empire to save the rest. A controlled collapse, one that left nothing behind for the Bureau to rewrite. As Sarah prepared to leave, Vincent reached for her hand. This time, he did not pretend it was incidental. His grip was firm, grounding. "Once this starts," he said, "there's no coming back." Sarah nodded, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I'm already gone." They separated as dawn broke, the city unaware of how close it stood to implosion. The operation clock had accelerated. Betrayal had chosen its sides. And somewhere between blood and duty, two lives had aligned in a way neither could escape. The warehouse would burn. What rose from its ashes would decide everything. The warehouse breathed like a living thing, its corrugated walls holding decades of secrets in rust and dust. Vincent Torino stood at the edge of the property before dawn, the river fog curling around his shoes as if trying to pull him back. He had ordered the perimeter cleared hours earlier, quietly, without explanation. Men obeyed because obedience was safer than curiosity. Inside, the machinery was already in motion. This was not a retreat. It was a sacrifice. Vincent issued instructions with the calm of a surgeon. Certain crates would be moved. Certain ledgers would be left behind. Fire would be contained, controlled, devastating enough to satisfy those watching without revealing the deeper veins beneath the surface. He had burned parts of his empire before. What made this different was not the loss, but the reason. Across town, Sarah Martinez watched the operation clock tick down from a screen she should never have accessed. Her credentials still worked. Barely. Each login felt like walking across thin ice that sang beneath her weight. Internal channels buzzed with activity, language sanitized and procedural. The Bureau was preparing its statement before the smoke had even risen. She forwarded a fragment of intel to Vincent, then erased her tracks with hands steadier than she felt. The message was short, precise. Units were being rerouted. The strike window had narrowed. Someone upstairs wanted this finished cleanly and fast. Vincent read the update without reaction. He adjusted the plan. When the first explosion tore through the warehouse, it sounded less like chaos and more like release. Fire climbed the steel beams in a disciplined fury, devouring what Vincent had chosen to abandon. Sirens followed, distant at first, then immediate. He watched the flames with an expression carved from stone, mourning nothing he could afford to lose. Sarah arrived minutes later, slipping past the outer cordon under the cover of authority that was already dissolving. Smoke burned her lungs as she moved through the chaos, eyes scanning for Vincent. She found him near the river's edge, silhouetted against the fire, impossibly still. "You shouldn't be here," he said, without turning. "Neither should you," she replied. For a moment, the world shrank to heat and noise, and the fragile understanding that had grown between them. This was the cost of choosing each other's truths. This was the moment when alliances stopped being theoretical. The twist came fast. A black SUV cut through the chaos, stopping too close, too decisively. Men emerged not in bureau jackets, but in unmarked gear. Their movements were efficient, familiar. Vincent recognized them instantly. Private contractors. Someone had outsourced the ending. "They weren't supposed to be here," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I know," Vincent replied. Gunfire cracked the air, sharp and indiscriminate. Vincent pulled Sarah down behind a concrete barrier as bullets chewed into steel. The controlled collapse became something else entirely. Improvised. Dangerous. Alive. They moved together without discussion, instincts aligning. Vincent covered angles. Sarah relayed positions, her voice calm despite the adrenaline tearing through her veins. She was not just reacting. She was adapting. Vincent noticed. He filed it away with the growing list of things about her that refused to fit into neat categories. They reached a service corridor choked with smoke. Vincent keyed a hidden panel, revealing a narrow passage that dropped toward the river. He hesitated only once, glancing back at the inferno consuming what he had built. "Are you ready?" he asked. Sarah met his gaze, ash streaking her face, eyes clear. "I was ready the moment I wrote the note." They descended as the warehouse roared behind them, fire collapsing steel with thunderous finality. By the time they emerged near the waterline, the official narrative was already forming overhead, helicopters slicing through smoke like punctuation marks. They did not speak until they were clear. In the quiet that followed, the weight of what they had done pressed in. Vincent had lost assets, men, ground. Sarah had crossed a line that would never be erased from her file. Neither pretended otherwise. "You burned your shield," Sarah said softly. Vincent nodded. "And you burned your badge." A pause. Not regret. Recognition. They moved to a safe apartment as dawn broke, the city pretending nothing had changed. Inside, exhaustion set in like a second skin. Vincent poured water. Not alcohol. Sarah accepted it, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "What happens next?" she asked. Vincent considered the question with a seriousness reserved for turning points. "Next, we become unpredictable." He explained the pivot. With the warehouse gone, the Bureau would claim victory. Marco would be paraded as proof of success. The contractors would vanish, and the true architect would remain untouched, unless they forced exposure at the right moment. Sarah listened, absorbing the risk. "They'll come for me," she said. "They already are," Vincent replied. "Which means they'll underestimate you." Their closeness lingered, charged but restrained. When Vincent reached to brush ash from her cheek, the gesture was gentle, almost reverent. Sarah did not pull away. She leaned into it, just enough to acknowledge what neither dared name. This was not safety. It was something rarer. Partnership without illusion. Outside, the sun climbed, gilding smoke into something almost beautiful. The city would remember the fire as a footnote, a necessary correction. Only 2 people knew what it had truly cost. And only one thing was certain now. The war had shifted, and love, in its most dangerous form, had entered the battlefield. The safe apartment overlooked the river, its windows sealed tight against a city that had learned how to listen. Sirens faded into distance, replaced by the low hum of water moving past concrete. Inside, the quiet was dense, weighted with everything they had not said. Vincent removed his jacket and set it aside with deliberate care, as if the ritual itself could keep the world from intruding. He moved through the room checking angles, locks, lines of sight, habit, control. When he finally stopped, Sarah was watching him, her posture composed, her eyes not. "You live like this all the time," she said softly. "I live," Vincent replied. "The rest is detail." Sarah exhaled, a sound that carried fatigue and something like grief. She had spent her career believing structure could hold chaos at bay. Tonight had taught her otherwise. Systems bent. People burned. Truth survived only if someone paid for it in advance. Vincent poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. Their fingers touched, lingered, then withdrew. The moment stretched, fragile and unguarded. Outside, the river caught the city's lights and broke them into shards. "Your people," Sarah said. "Did they all get out enough?" Vincent answered. He did not lie. He did not elaborate. She nodded, accepting the boundary. Boundaries were the only reason they could stand this close without falling apart. She took a sip, then set the glass down, hands steadying on the edge of the counter. "They've moved me," she said. "Administrative leave, effective immediately." Vincent's jaw tightened. "That was fast. They're containing variables." She met his gaze. "I'm one of them." Silence followed. Not empty, but deliberate. The kind that let truth breathe. "I can disappear." Sarah continued. "I know how." "New name, new city, and spend the rest of your life running from a lie," Vincent asked. "That's not who you are." She laughed quietly, a sound without humor. "You don't know who I am?" "I know enough," he said. "You wrote the note." That stopped her. She turned fully toward him, the space between them narrowing until it felt intentional. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it because I couldn't live with myself otherwise." Vincent's voice softened, dangerous in its restraint. "That's exactly why it matters." The air shifted, not rushed, not forced. When he reached for her, it was not to claim, but to ask. His hand rested at her waist, waiting. Sarah's breath caught, then steadied. She closed the distance herself, pressing her forehead to his chest, listening to a heartbeat that had outpaced death more times than she could imagine. The kiss came quietly. No urgency, no illusion. It tasted like restraint and choice, like 2 people acknowledging a truth they would never allow to weaken them. When they parted, neither pretended it meant less than it did. They sat together on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching. Vincent spoke first, voice low. "There's something you need to know." Sarah turned to him. "The contractors," he continued. "They weren't hired by the Bureau." Her expression sharpened. Then who Vincent reached into a secure folder and placed a single name between them. A man with influence that crossed agencies and borders, protected by a reputation built on results and silence. The kind of man who cleaned messes by making them disappear. "He's been steering outcomes for years," Vincent said. "Marco was a tool, so was the operation." Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her understanding. If that's true, then this was never about justice. Vincent finished. It was about erasing inconvenient truths. The implications rippled outward. Every move they had made had been anticipated, redirected, monetized. The fire, the narrative, the scapegoats. "They'll come again," Sarah said. "Cleaner next time." "Yes," Vincent agreed, "which is why we won't wait." They worked through the night, assembling fragments into something dangerous. Financial trails, encrypted communications, timing windows that could not be reset. Vincent had resources Sarah had never imagined. Sarah had access Vincent could not replicate. Together, they became something the system could not categorize. As dawn approached, Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You did well at the warehouse. Step away now." Her blood cooled. Vincent read it over her shoulder, expression darkening. "He knows," Sarah whispered. "He always did," Vincent replied. "The question is whether he thinks you're finished." Another message followed, this one shorter. "Last chance." Sarah deleted it without responding. Vincent watched her, a flicker of something like pride crossing his face. That was the right choice. "Was it?" she asked quietly. "No," he said. "But it was yours." They stood by the window as the sun rose, pale and indifferent. The city looked unchanged. It always did. That was how power survived. Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, just for a moment. "When this is over," she said, "there may not be a place for either of us." Vincent's arm circled her, protective without possession. "There's always a place," he said. "It just isn't always on the map." The day began. Phones rang, lines were crossed. Somewhere, a man who believed himself untouchable adjusted his plans. And in a quiet apartment above the river, two people stood at the edge of everything they were about to lose, knowing the next move would change the rules forever. The city woke to rumors before it woke to facts. Screens flickered with half-confirmed headlines, whispers disguised as certainty. The warehouse fire had become an isolated incident. Marco's name surfaced briefly, then softened into speculation. Someone was shaping the story with practiced hands. Vincent Torino watched the coverage without sound. He stood in the shadowed corner of the apartment, jacket on, expression carved from restraint. The man named in the folder had not surfaced publicly. That omission was louder than any accusation. Sarah moved through the room with a quiet urgency, packing what little could not be replaced. She felt the pressure building, the sensation of being watched not by eyes, but by timing. The message from the night before lingered like a bruise. Last chance. Men who believed they controlled outcomes always phrased their threats that way. "They'll move tonight," she said. "They won't wait for daylight." Vincent nodded. "Neither will we." They split the work without discussion. Sarah tunneled into channels she no longer officially had access to, exploiting habits she knew too well. Vincent made calls that did not ring, issuing instructions that sounded like memories. The plan was no longer about exposure alone. It was about forcing the predator to reveal himself by disrupting his assumptions. The first sign came just after dusk. A black sedan idled across the street longer than traffic required. Sarah noticed it in the reflection of the window, her body reacting before her mind did. Vincent followed her gaze and smiled faintly, not amused. "They've found us," she said. "They think they have." Vincent replied. He pulled a small device from his pocket and placed it on the table. "We leave in 5. They did not take the elevator. The stairwell echoed with their steps, each one measured. Outside, the air carried the promise of rain. Vincent's car slid into motion, not toward safety, but toward friction. He drove like a man inviting attention, turning where caution advised against it. The sedan followed. Sarah monitored the city feed on her phone, fingers moving with controlled speed. 2 more vehicles joined, she said. "Unmarked?" "Good," Vincent murmured. "Let them commit." They crossed the bridge into the old quarter. Streets narrowing, lights thinning. Vincent took a sudden turn into a service road that ended near the river. He cut the engine and stepped out, the night swallowing the sound. Sarah followed, heart hammering. The city's pulse suddenly close and personal. The sedan stopped at the road's mouth. Doors opened. Men emerged, disciplined, anonymous. They did not shout. They did not negotiate. That was how Sarah knew who they belonged to. Vincent raised his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. "You're late," he said. A man stepped forward, face forgettable by design. "You were warned." "So was she," Vincent replied. "And yet, here we are." The man's gaze flicked to Sarah, assessing. "This doesn't end well for you." Sarah felt Vincent's presence beside her, steady as a wall. "It already ended," she said calmly. "You're just finishing the paperwork." The man smiled thinly. "You think you have leverage?" Vincent met his eyes. "I think you've been careful for too long to believe in accidents." The river surged behind them, black and relentless, for a breathless moment. The night balanced on a blade. Then sirens cut through the quiet. Not approaching, encircling. The man's smile faltered. He reached for his radio. Static answered. Around them, lights flared as unmarked vehicles found themselves boxed in by official ones. Doors slammed, orders echoed. The hunter had become visible. Sarah exhaled shakily. You tipped them. No, Vincent said. I reminded them. He had leaked just enough truth to agencies that resented being managed from the shadows. Not names, not accusations, patterns, proof of interference. Pride did the rest. The men were taken without spectacle. The night swallowed the scene and moved on. In the aftermath, Vincent and Sarah stood alone by the river. Rain began to fall, soft and unassuming. The city lights smeared into color. They'll retaliate, Sarah said. Yes, Vincent agreed, but not blindly. They'll try to make us disappear quietly. She turned to him, eyes searching. We can't stay together. Not like this. He considered her with a tenderness he rarely allowed himself. I know. The admission hurt more than denial would have. They walked until the rain soaked through their clothes, until the city loosened its grip. At a quiet corner, they stopped. This was not a goodbye shaped by romance, but by survival. When this is over, Sarah said, voice steady, they'll say I was compromised. They'll say worse, Vincent replied. It means you mattered. She smiled, small and fierce. You make it sound almost noble. He reached out, brushing her knuckles with his own. It is. They parted without looking back. Vincent disappeared into a city that had learned to fear his absence. Sarah slipped into a system that no longer knew where to place her. The night closed around them, indifferent and infinite. Somewhere above, a man who had believed himself untouchable recalculated his odds, and for the first time, uncertainty entered his room. Disappearance was not an event, it was a process. By morning, the city had already edited Vincent Torino out of its vocabulary. His name no longer appeared in reports. His businesses folded into holding companies that pretended they had always existed without him. Men who once answered his calls now answered silence. That was the true measure of power, not how loudly it resisted, but how efficiently it erased. Vincent watched this unraveling from a distance, in a place that did not belong to him and never would. The room was modest, stripped of history, a temporary shelter for a man who had once owned rooms like this without remembering them. He accepted the loss without sentiment. Regret was a luxury for men who had options. Sarah's disappearance looked different. She still walked the same streets, entered the same buildings, showed her badge when required. But inside the bureau, her name shifted tone, no longer spoken with trust, not yet spoken with accusation. She existed in a corridor between usefulness and blame, where careers were quietly dismantled. Her supervisor called her in mid-afternoon. The office felt smaller than before, the glass walls no longer offering transparency, only exposure. You've been reassigned, he said. Pending review? Sarah nodded. To where he slid a folder across the desk. An internal task force. Administrative in name only. Isolated. Controlled. Designed to occupy, not to empower. This protects you, he added. Not unkindly. Sarah understood the translation. This buries you until we decide what story you fit into. She accepted without argument. Resistance would accelerate the outcome. Survival required patience now, not defiance. That night, she walked alone along the river. The same water Vincent had once stood beside. The same lights broken into color. She did not expect to hear from him. Expectation was another thing she had learned to dismantle. The message arrived anyway. No sender, no greeting. You're being watched from above, not beside you. Her breath caught. Vincent. She typed back slowly, deliberately. I know. They're waiting for me to make a mistake. Then don't make one, came the reply. Let them think you're afraid. Sarah smiled faintly. He understood her better than anyone ever had. Across the city, the man in the shadows recalculated again. The arrests by the river had not been fatal, but they had been disruptive, too visible, too chaotic. He had built his reputation on quiet outcomes. Vincent Torino had forced noise into his system. That could not be allowed to continue. Orders were adjusted, not to eliminate, but to isolate. Vincent would be starved of relevance. Sarah would be positioned as the eventual liability. The story would end without drama. That was the plan. But plans assumed compliance. Vincent received word of the shift through channels that no longer officially existed. He listened without reaction, then closed the line. They wanted him contained, predictable. They believed love made men careless. They were half right. He left his shelter before dawn, moving through cities that did not know his name and therefore could not betray it. He did not go to ground. He went lateral, into spaces where power pooled unnoticed. Old debts, quiet alliances, people who did not care about narratives, only outcomes. Meanwhile, Sarah's new assignment proved exactly as hollow as promised. Endless reports, redacted files, meetings that resolved nothing. But in the margins, she noticed inconsistencies, names repeated, decisions rerouted. The same invisible hand she had glimpsed before, she documented everything, carefully, not to act yet, but to remember. One evening, as she left the building late, she sensed the shift before it happened. Footsteps behind her, spaced too evenly, a car idling where none should be. She did not panic. Panic drew attention. She turned down a busier street, let the crowd absorb her, and slipped into a cafe just before closing. Her phone buzzed as she sat down. "They tested you tonight," Vincent wrote. "You passed?" She did not ask how he knew. Instead, she typed, "How long can this last?" The reply came slower this time. "As long as we let them believe they're winning." Sarah leaned back, the weight of the truth settling into place. Disappearance was not about vanishing. It was about becoming uninteresting to the wrong people while remaining dangerous to the right ones. Weeks passed. The city forgot the fire. Headlines moved on. Marco was sentenced quietly. The name behind the contractors never surfaced. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. Sarah and Vincent did not meet. They did not speak often. Their connection lived in fragments, in warnings and silences that carried more meaning than words ever could. It was not romance built on proximity. It was something rarer. Trust without visibility. One night, Sarah stood on her balcony. The city spread beneath her like a living map. She felt alone, but not abandoned. Somewhere beyond reach. Vincent was navigating the same darkness from a different angle. The price of disappearing, she realized, was learning to exist without proof. And the danger was not that they would be found. It was that when the time came to return, the world would no longer recognize what they had become. The truth rarely announced itself. It waited. Months after the fire, after the arrests, after the city had convinced itself that the story was finished, the system began to strain under the weight of what had been buried too carefully. Patterns resurfaced. Financial ghosts reappeared. Decisions once hidden by urgency now stood exposed by time. Sarah Martinez noticed first. It came as a discrepancy so small it might have escaped anyone else, a transfer authorized by a department that no longer existed. Signed by a name officially retired. She followed it quietly, tracing threads that led not to chaos, but to order that was too precise to be organic. Someone had been orchestrating outcomes long before the warehouse burned. She did not act immediately. She waited, collecting proof with the patience she had learned from Vincent. Each document was duplicated, each trail mapped twice. She stored nothing in one place. Survival, she knew now, was a matter of redundancy. When she finally reached out, it was not through words. Vincent received a package at an address that did not belong to him. Inside was a single drive and a note written in a familiar hand. "It's time." He stared at the message longer than he should have. He had built his life on timing. He trusted Sarah because she understood it as well as he did. If she believed the moment had come, then the ground was already shifting. They met again in a city neither of them had chosen, one that existed between departures and arrivals. The reunion was quiet. No relief, no rush, just recognition, sharpened by absence. "You found him," Vincent said. "I found enough," Sarah replied. "The rest will come once it starts." They worked side by side without ceremony, their movements synchronized by shared history. The evidence was damning not because it was explosive, but because it was undeniable. Financial leverage, operational interference, testimony buried under sealed orders. The kind of truth that could not be dismissed without dismantling the structure protecting it. The question was not whether to release it. It was how. "They'll try to contain it," Sarah said. "Offer scapegoats. Redirect blame," Vincent nodded. "Which is why it can't come from either of us." They had anticipated this. A third path. An independent disclosure through channels that thrived on exposure rather than control. The information would surface slowly, methodically, impossible to suppress without drawing attention to itself. When it broke, it did not explode. It unraveled. Names surfaced. Positions shifted. Quiet resignations followed. The man who had believed himself untouchable was suddenly visible, stripped of the shadows that had protected him. He did not fall publicly. He faded, which was worse. Power despised nothing more than irrelevance. Sarah watched the coverage from a distance, emotions restrained but real. She felt no triumph, only a strange calm. Justice, she had learned, was not loud. It was persistent. Vincent stood beside her, close enough to feel, distant enough to remain himself. "This is where we decide," he said softly. She turned to him. Decide what? Whether we keep running, he replied, or whether we stop letting the past dictate our shape. The world had narrowed again, not into danger, but into possibility. They had both lost things they could never reclaim. Careers, identities, certainties. What remained was choice. I can't go back. Sarah said, not to who I was. Vincent's expression softened, unguarded in a way few had ever seen. Neither can I. They walked that night through streets that did not know their names. The city felt different without the weight of being watched. Lighter, honest in its indifference. At the edge of a quiet square, Sarah stopped. There's something I've been afraid to say, she admitted. Vincent waited. I don't know what a life looks like without constant vigilance, she said. I don't know if I'm good at peace. He considered her carefully, then reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with deliberate certainty. Peace isn't the absence of danger, he said. It's choosing where to stand anyway. She met his gaze, searching for the man beneath the myth. She found him there, steady and flawed and real. The final move was not dramatic. No arrests, no declarations, just a series of confirmations that the system had begun correcting itself, slowly and imperfectly, enough to matter. As dawn broke, Sarah and Vincent stood by a window overlooking a city that would never know how close it had come to collapse. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty did not feel like a threat. It felt like an opening, and somewhere between the ruins of who they had been and the promise of who they might become. Hope took its first, quiet breath. The city did not notice when Vincent Torino stopped running. That, more than anything, told him the war was over. Months had passed since the truth unraveled quietly through corridors of power, since names lost weight and silence changed owners. The world had not become clean, but it had become different. Dangerous men no longer called his name in whispers. Fear had loosened its grip, replaced by something unfamiliar. Choice. Vincent stood on a terrace overlooking the sea in a country that asked no questions. The air smelled of salt and late afternoon sun, a softness that once would have made him uneasy. He had lived his life measuring danger in seconds. Peace, he was learning, moved in slower rhythms. Behind him, footsteps approached without caution. He did not turn immediately. You're late, he said. Sarah smiled at his back. You always say that. When he faced her, the years fell away from his expression. Not entirely, but enough. She looked different too, lighter. The tension that had once lived permanently between her shoulders had eased, replaced by a quiet certainty. She was no longer an agent waiting for orders, nor a woman hiding in plain sight. She was simply herself. I almost didn't come, she admitted, stepping closer, not because I didn't want to, because I was afraid it would feel unreal. And now, Vincent asked. Sarah looked around. The open horizon, the absence of urgency, the man who had once ruled shadows now standing unarmed before her. Now it feels earned. They walked together along the stone path, the sea stretching endlessly beside them. There was no rush to speak. Silence had become something they shared rather than survived. Sarah told him about her last meeting with the Bureau. No accusations, no apologies, just a closed door and a signed resignation. They had let her go because keeping her would have meant acknowledging too much. She did not mourn it. I thought I'd feel empty, she said. But I don't, Vincent nodded. That's how you know it was never your home. He told her about the final dissolution of what remained of his empire, not with regret, but with clarity. Power, he had learned, was only useful when it protected something worth keeping. He had spent years guarding structures instead of meaning. They stopped near the edge of the terrace where the light softened into gold. Sarah turned to him, hesitation flickering across her face, a rare thing now. There's still a question we haven't answered, she said. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Only one. She laughed quietly, then grew serious. What happens after the story ends? He studied her, the woman who had walked into his life carrying fear and truth in equal measure. We stop letting the past write the next chapter. And if it catches up to us, she asked. Then we face it, Vincent replied. Together. But it won't own us. The word hung between them. Fragile and powerful. Together. Sarah reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. No hesitation this time. The gesture felt ordinary in the best way. Not dramatic, not defiant, just real. That night, they sat beneath an open sky, sharing a meal prepared without guards or contingency plans. Vincent watched Sarah as she laughed freely, unburdened by codes and consequences. He realized then that happiness was not loud. It did not demand proof. It existed quietly, asking only to be noticed. Later, as the world settled into sleep, Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The power? The control?" Vincent considered the question honestly. "I miss who I thought I needed to be," he said, "not who I actually was." She smiled, content. Days turned into routines. Morning walks, shared books, conversations about nothing and everything. They learned each other without urgency, without fear of time running out. Love, when it finally arrived fully, did not announce itself. It simply stayed. One evening, as the sun disappeared into the sea, Vincent reached into his pocket and placed a small object in Sarah's palm. A ring, simple and unassuming, chosen without spectacle. "No vows," he said quietly. "No promises we can't keep." Sarah closed her fingers around it, eyes bright. "Just a life," she replied, "built honestly." He slid the ring onto her hand, sealing not an escape, but a beginning. The shadows that had once defined them receded into memory, no longer sharp enough to wound. They did not forget who they had been. They honored it by choosing differently. As night fell, the sea reflected the stars, endless and calm. Vincent Torino, once a man shaped by darkness, stood beside the woman who had rewritten his fate not by saving him, but by seeing him. And in that quiet, hard-won peace, they finally reached a place neither of them had believed in, a life that belonged to them both.